Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode here on the Workgroup for Languages of Limited Diffusion. I'm your host for today, David Brackett. I'm really excited to be sitting here and interviewing Jace Norton. I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit about his bio, and I know that you all are going to find extreme value in what Jace is doing, what got him started in our industry, his extreme passion for indigenous languages. Where did that come from? We're going to learn a lot about him and the exciting things that he's doing in our language industry. So just a little bit about his bio I'm going to read before we get started, and I'm going to introduce Jace to the show. Jace discovered a love for languages while volunteering as a missionary for 2 years in Guatemala from 2010 to 2012. During that time, he learned Spanish and Kekchi, a Mayan language from Guatemala, fluently. He later went on to major in Arabic at Brigham Young University and spent considerable time studying and working in Amman, Jordan. Although he never expected to work in the field of language access, story for many of us, right? His life experiences and circumstances seem to propel him towards it. Again, we hear this a lot. He was eventually recruited to work as a Kekchi interpreter, where he began to understand the considerable demand for Kekchi and other indigenous languages like it in the US. Not long after becoming an interpreter, Jace felt compelled to do more for indigenous languages and providing language access than he could do on his own, and founded Maya Bridge in 2021. Since then, he and his team have worked towards filling the niche for language access services in indigenous languages and other lower diffusion languages, and have worked virtually in every state across all fields. Maya Bridge now provides services in over 90 indigenous languages and other lower diffusion languages from around the world, along with other widely spoken languages like Spanish, French, Russian. And Jace lives in Salt Lake City, Utah, with his 8-year-old son, who keeps him young and makes him feel very old at the same time. I know that feeling. I have a 3-year-old. And he also, in his spare time, enjoys rock climbing. So awesome. Thanks so much for being here, Jace. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Excellent. Well, how often do you get out and get to enjoy rock climbing?
These days, not as much. Between work and trying to, this year we've been really active as far as going to a lot of conferences and exhibiting, and that has ultimately fallen on my shoulders to go out and do these things. So I've been doing a lot of travel on behalf of Maya Bridge, which means that my rock climbing weekends are not happening as frequently.
I bet there's probably really beautiful rock climbing in the city, right?
Yeah, there's all kinds of really great rock climbing. So anyone that wants to do rock climbing,
pictures.
Yeah,
that's at some point. I'm sure we'd all love to see them. But you should post those on LinkedIn.
That'd be okay. Sounds good.
So I want to ask you just a few random questions about yourself for all of us that might not know you yet. Get to know you a little bit. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Dallas, Texas. Okay. And so that was like my elementary school years. And then I was in Kansas, in the Kansas City area during like high school. So kind of Midwest for the most part.
Favorite food?
Gosh, that's a tricky question. These days I've been really into Thai food. I appreciate a really good Penang curry. So that's typically like my birthday or like somewhere I get to choose where to go. That's kind of where I choose.
Nice. And if you could snap your fingers right now in this moment and go anywhere in the world in a time travel machine, where would you go?
Oh, man, I mean, I think I have to say that I would go to the zenith of the Mayan Empire. I would want to see what it was like and want to see, how the civilization was. I mean, I think it's such a cool civilization. So I think that's got to be my answer.
Yeah, good answer. Very, very, very funny.
Very appropriate.
And I want to hear a little bit more about your company and everything. So from reading your bio and understanding a little bit about your story, what was there a particular like aha moment where you saw the need to start Maya Bridge, and tell us a little bit about how that came to fruition?
Yeah, so I never knew that there was any kind of need for indigenous language interpretation in the US. I assumed, like most of us do, because we're not exposed to it, that it just doesn't exist, that there are no speakers of these languages here in the United States. I worked for about a year as an interpreter personally, but I wasn't, and my sort of understanding of that need was, it was really shocking, because I, again, never guessed that it would be so prevalent and all over the United States. But it wasn't until I was working at an intake site for unaccompanied children that I really saw tangibly, I could see like dozens of kids, and really more than that. I mean, it was like hundreds of kids that all spoke different languages, not just Kekchi, that needed interpretation and that weren't really getting it at the same level of accessibility that other languages get. So that was really for me when I said, I have to do something, I can't do this on my own. I need help. We need to build something that can handle this demand.
Yeah, no, that was you seeing it firsthand like that, seeing the children needing that language access must have been really impactful.
Yeah.
You had a really interesting post the other day where you were talking about the difference between a dialect and a variant. I want to unpack that a little bit with you, because I think a lot of people don't understand the difference, and we misuse a lot of terminology. So I think having a quick conversation about terminology will be really beneficial, hopefully, for the audience as well. So we'll start off with language variant. So what's a language variant?
Right. Well, so the word dialect means a variation in a language. That's all that it means. So it can be the accent, it can be vocabulary, it can be, even syntax a little bit. But we as a society have come to associate that word of dialect as meaning sort of a lesser or a, sort of underdeveloped language or sort of inferior language. And so we have given this word a socio-political connotation, and we have used that on indigenous languages. And so you'll hear a lot of people, especially in those countries where those languages are spoken, they'll refer to indigenous languages as like their little dialect, right? That's like a very common phrase. So, as we've kind of tried to start advocating to help change this narrative, we have realized that word dialect, it just has too much negative connotation and association with that false sort of definition that we've given it. So we've decided we're just not going to use that word at all in our vocabulary, and we're going to replace it with the word variant. So we're using the word variant to talk about a variance in a language, right? And with indigenous languages, it's, we often think of, for example, English from America and English from the UK. Those are two different variants of the English language, right? That we have different words to say different things, but we can generally understand each other relatively well, mostly because the English language has kind of this glue of common consensus, of technology, of schooling, education, literature, all these things that keep us, relatively speaking, we don't stray too far from each other. But with indigenous languages, we don't have that same type of glue. And so what that ends up meaning is that languages like Mixteco, which are spread across a wider geographical area, right? They, over time, have become so different that they're still technically classified as the same language, but they're not mutually intelligible, or they're on at least a spectrum of mutual intelligibility, so that a speaker from one region of Mixteco will not understand a speaker of Mixteco from another region.
Right.
Now, I mean, I guess it's debatable. Should it be its own language? Should we reclassify it as its own language? That's something that we don't really get into, right? But we're saying we're not going to call it a dialect to make sure that we're not using that negative association of that word. We're going to remove it completely. So all languages are languages, and within those languages, you can have a variant or a regional variant.
Yeah, and that happens over time as individuals might move and shift. The language can evolve, and it might not be the same in that region.
Yep.
Thank you for breaking that down for us. I know we were talking the other day as well, just about the terminology as well, with that does get some more exposure now of what is the proper way also to refer to, and obviously the name of our work group here, the NCIHC, is LLD, right? Languages of Limited Diffusion.
Right.
And is that the best acronym? Is that the best terminology to utilize? There are other ways. I think starting with the wrong ways to refer to them. What are the wrong ways that people need to also just remove from their vocabulary?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we want to remove anything that puts the emphasis on something other than its intrinsic value, right? So I hear a lot of people say, oh, we're looking for this rare language, or it's an obscure language, or most of the time they would say it's obscure dialect, right? So that's two strikes. Or, exotic. All these things are putting us in framing our mindset to think about these as languages that are somehow different from our language. And the reality is all languages are exactly the same in the sense that there are tools for communication that speakers use to communicate. And there's nothing exotic or rare or foreign or anything about their language to them. And so the most important thing we need to do as an industry, I would say, is to make sure we're just using neutral, technical terminology that allows us to not think about these things with any extra baggage or extra sort of, that's going to alter our perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, makes perfect sense. I think that's really, really helpful for everyone to be reminded of, especially those that aren't in our industry. I mean, but even in our industry, I do hear individuals. Just the other day, I heard at a language service company owner refer to the languages as exotic languages, and I was like,
yeah. Yeah, and we want to avoid that, because every time we do that, it's going to affect the way that we ultimately can provide those services. If we think of them as like, oh, they're like exotic, or they're really rare. And I think in most cases, I would say that the languages are, comparatively, you can say that they are rare in the sense that they're harder to come by maybe, but there's millions of speakers of indigenous languages. And, so every time that we're going to put it in that light, we're not giving it the right attention and the right focus.
Yeah, I agree. What do you see right now as the biggest challenge that you're facing in our industry?
The biggest challenge that we're facing, I would say, is there's two challenges, right? The first challenge would be getting the word out that we exist, right? That's our main focus, is letting people know, hey, we do exist, and this is our focus, and this is our mission, so that people can, I think there's still so many different people all across the United States who they're encountering these languages, and they're kind of at a loss as to how to deal with these languages, how to get interpreters, where to find them. So that's kind of our number one area of focus, is trying to make sure people know about us. I think one of the other big challenges, especially in healthcare, is really truly identifying and assessing the need, because from a language access sort of, coordinator perspective, or perception, I should say, right? That perception based on the input that they get is that, oh, we don't really see these languages, right? But especially with Latin American indigenous languages, because these individuals, in addition to being, to having limited English proficiency, they also have limited Spanish proficiency, meaning that when they go to the hospital, some or all members of that family will have limited Spanish proficiency typically, meaning that they will speak in Spanish to get those services started, and the hospital will likely provide Spanish interpreters, and then it's up in the air as to whether or not they will actually ever get an interpreter in their native language, or whether or not it will even be identified. So I would say that's probably the other biggest challenge that we're facing, is trying to educate the industry, especially in healthcare and in other fields, to help everyone realize that within the idea of limited English proficiency, there also exists smaller niche, categories of limited Spanish proficiency, or even limited Russian proficiency, limited French proficiency, that we need to train our interpreters how to recognize that and then what to do. Because I hear all the time, I hear interpreters who say, yeah, I didn't know what to do. I could tell that the person had limited proficiency in Spanish, but I didn't, or even sometimes they'll say that I let my language access person know, or the company that I'm working for, I let them know. And the reaction is not always great. Sometimes it's just, a shrug of the shoulders and do your best. And I think that that's really not the best practice ethically, and is not the best solution for those individuals, especially when the resources do exist.
Right. And speaking of resources, what does recruiting look like for your agency, and how does that different maybe than let's say recruiting for some of the common languages like maybe Spanish or Russian?
Yeah. So it is a lot more of an active process, right? It would be very, very difficult for you to just put out an ad and say, I'm looking for speakers of these languages, and that people would come and apply and say, yes, I speak, Chalchiteco, and I'd love to work for you. That doesn't really happen at this moment in time. First of all, because individuals that speak those languages and that can also speak either Spanish or English well enough to interpret, they likely don't know that this work exists. And then the other challenge is that, for like languages that have a lot lower diffusion, like a language like Chalchiteco, there's likely not enough work to keep someone busy full time as a Chalchiteco interpreter. And they may not have enough English to be able to work as a Spanish to English interpreter to fill up the rest of their time. And so for them, they're looking for a full-time job, right? As we all want. And so it does, it's difficult to convince people to say, hey, first of all, there is this need, and can you help us? And so what we do is a lot of active recruiting, meaning that we travel quite a bit throughout the United States. And because a lot of our clients are asking us to provide interpreters that are U.S. citizens or have U.S. residency, that's another huge, kind of barrier and complication, but that is kind of the way that it is. So we do a lot of traveling, and we go to places where we know there's, higher densities of populations of individuals from indigenous communities. And we go and we find those who, have the skill set that maybe don't have that training or the knowledge about the work. And we help to get them into the industry.
And what about, as far as training goes, what kind of opportunities do you see maybe that My Languages provides, or that are out there, that for anyone that might be listening, or that wants to get maybe some of their interpreters that represent indigenous languages trained, what do those opportunities look like?
Well, and that's another problem, is that there are not nearly enough or as many opportunities for speakers of indigenous languages as there need to be, especially because, like we talked about with Latin American indigenous languages, in order to meet the demand, we have to use individuals who speak Spanish and the target language. And there's relatively very little when it comes to Spanish training for healthcare interpretation, for example, or Spanish training for any other, really field. So, there are programs and groups, community-based organizations that are helping to do that. But I think we definitely, as an industry, we need to broaden that scope and be able to remove as many barriers to entry as possible. And that's why we are in the process of developing our own sort of asynchronous training that can be done from any time, anywhere, any place. And we're going to make it free so that speakers of lower diffusion languages, there's really no barrier to entry. You don't have to pay anything. You can have a full-time job and take this training. You can do it from your computer, and it'll be available in English and in Spanish. So that's what we're working towards. It's going to take some time and some blood, sweat, and tears, but
sure.
But we're really looking forward to having that sometime next year.
Okay, that's really exciting. one more question before my final question for you, Jace. I know we're coming close to time. So how could other language service companies be able to help support and be able to provide better language access to indigenous communities?
I think the expertise and the nuanced sort of care that we need to have when it comes to these languages has to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So if a company is willing to go and bring in the experts that can direct them and guide them and help them to be able to work with the interpreters, be able to provide culturally appropriate services and to navigate the need, that's great. But those who can't, or who are don't really want to, they should be relying on niche or boutique LSPs like MayaBridge. And that same thing applies, for example, with other groups of languages, right? If you can't navigate that in a culturally and ethically responsible way, then you shouldn't, and you should be outsourcing that, especially where these languages are not obviously the bulk of a demand for a mid-sized or larger language service provider, right? They're important because it is prevalent and happening a lot of the time, but it's not something that a language company is a major source of revenue for that company, for example. So I think they should be a lot more, and they are to a large extent, by the way. I have larger or mid-sized companies that come to us all the time and want to collaborate and work with us, and that's great. So I think we need to continue to do that. And if those companies are able to bring in their own in-house expertise to navigate this, then that's also great.
Wonderful. What message would you like to leave with the community today? Message of inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best message I can leave, probably the majority of interpreters and individuals listening to this are likely not indigenous language interpreters. So just to keep educating ourselves and to keep opening and expanding our view to understand that these languages, they do exist. Many people, they just don't even know that they exist, and they're here in the United States. And not only, we tend to, from the language services and the language access perspective, we look at kind of high level data, but these are individuals and families just like you and me who are here and they're trying to live, and they can't do that if they can't communicate. And so I guess just to keep raising that awareness within ourselves, to not discount the fact that your neighbor, right, or you're in your town, in your village, in your city, wherever you're living, there likely are speakers of indigenous languages, and they often go kind of under the radar. So to just be aware of it and to spread the word, I guess, to make sure that those individuals get the same level of care that everyone else does.
Beautiful message. Thanks so much, Jace. And how people that want to maybe get in touch with you, what's the best way they can find you or find Maya Language?
Yeah, our most active platform that we have is LinkedIn. So if you look up our company, MayaBridge Language Services, on LinkedIn, that's the best way to keep up with us and our advocacy efforts. And then our website is mayabridge.org. And you can get in contact with us there as well. Our email and our phone number are there. We're always happy to talk to anybody that needs those language services, that needs training on how to navigate working with populations from indigenous communities, or anything else.
Wonderful. Well, you all heard it there straight from Jace himself, and it's been wonderful to see you, Jace, at several different conferences that we bumped into each other and attended, and it's really great to see your message getting out there and that there are these resources available in so many languages that you help cover. I think in your bio it says over 90 indigenous languages, right? So that's pretty remarkable. Wish you nothing but just continued success. And for those of you who are, again, interested, feel free to connect directly with Jace. And Jace, it was an honor to have you here on the show.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here.